Thank you very much. I invite everyone in the out here in the balcony in the dark room, if y'all would like to come in and crowd in here, bring your chairs. Maybe you might enjoy the program more. We're delighted to be here this evening. We've had to deal with a number of different comments and suggestions. Margaret, you might as well come on up. Well, another fanfare for Margaret. Nathan and I heard about this program. We went running up to Tommy Lamb, the current president, and said we want to do this, and you know he said, well, okay, I guess you can do that. And so then a few weeks went by, and he got to thinking about that, and he got to hearing about our program, and he got to worrying, and he called me last night from his car phone, of course, and the guy was really worried, and he kept humming and hawing, and I wondered what in the world was on his mind, and he finally came out and I could see he was worried about how long this program was going to go on. We've got 20 minutes scheduled, you know, and we've got 17 presidents times 20. What is that? 340 minutes. You will be home in time for the David Letterman rerun. No problem. Also, as a matter of taste, Margaret, when she heard about Nathan and me working on this thing, she said, now, Robert, we want to keep this thing, you know, sort of simple. And I said, well, you know, what about the Texas A&M marching band? And she said, no. And I said, well, what about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders? And she said, absolutely not. And I said, well, for sure we're going to have Tommy Vance and some off-color jokes. And she said, you just gritted her teeth, and she said, Robert. So we've been warned to keep this thing simple and short, and we hope that we can achieve that and yet give you some satisfaction tonight. Let me help myself with my eyeglasses. Has everybody sort of found a place where they'll feel comfortable tonight? And can everyone hear me all right in the back of the room? Jerry Duty, can you hear all right back there? Okay? Thank you very much. Fellow Rotarians, ladies and gentlemen, this evening is a bittersweet occasion, a time when we bid farewell to our beloved Margaret Cherb. Sadness is mixed with thanksgiving. Reluctantly, we let her go, but gratefully, we remember the good times. Margaret, on behalf of all Beaumont Rotarians, past and present, especially those here assembled this evening, we thank you for your work and for your friendship, and especially for good memories. Every Rotarian could and should have speaking parts in this celebration, but tonight the club presidents claim executive privilege. Because of their dependence on you, they have a unique perspective. They, more than anyone else, know what you have accomplished and what your leadership has meant to this organization. You have served with 31 presidents, or to put it more accurately, 31 have served with you. All claim your friendship, and many are here tonight. Unfortunately, 3 have passed away: J.O. Crook, Warner Rogers, and Bill Phillips. If J.O. and Warner and Bill were here this evening, they would be in the forefront of this celebration, especially Bill adding his rare gifts of sparkling humor and brotherly wisdom. This is a letter addressed to Margaret Cherb on the occasion of her retirement from the Rotary Club of Beaumont, dated December the 17th, 1996. Dear Margaret, 30 years ago you came to Beaumont and took up the responsibility of running this Rotary Club. The results of your efforts have been outstanding. A good organization has been made better. You accepted responsibility for a proud organization already more than 50 years old. You maintained its character and its traditions, keeping it noble in purpose, protecting it from internal politics, and guarding it from religious dissensions. Because of you, the club has continued to attract the loyalty of hundreds of Rotarians, some of whose memberships reach back 30, 40, and 50 years. To mention just a few, Smythe Shepard, Walter Crawford, Herf Weiner, George Schomburg, John Gray, Chester Weber, Gator Dollinger, Bill Terrell. And remember some who have passed away: George Adams, Peel Allison, Frank White, Chick Dollinger, George Morgan, and our good friend Jim Dunnigan. Under your influence, our club evolved, becoming diverse and taking on the appearance of America. In 1972, we began enrolling African American men, the first two, Elma Willard and Joe Bryant, proposed by Ed Dix and Bill Deavy. And 15 years later, in 1987, we invited women to membership. Naturally, appropriately, the first was you. Proposed by Roy Steinhagen and introduced by Jerry Nathan. And during your last year of service, we selected Lois Ann Stanton, the first ever female president-elect. Truly, thankfully, the times they are a-changing. You presided over the transition of the Rotary Club from a sedate gentleman's luncheon club to a dynamic public service organization whose members routinely give money and work to accomplish community service projects. Remember just a few: the Babe Saharius Park, Jacobs Park, Family Violence Center, Terrell Historical Library, Schlesinger Greenhouse, Trade Fair, Wuthering Heights Park, Camp Enterprise, Lucas Gusher Monument Association that became the Spindletop Museum, that became the Texas Energy Museum. Recall, Margaret, that when you came to Beaumont, the club had no funds set aside for community service projects. We were rich in members but had nothing in the bank. In 1973, you helped organize the Beaumont Rotary Foundation. You worked with Ken Ruddy and Mark Steinhagen and Elvis Mason and Tom Lamb and the late Peter Wells and Du Bois, John Quigley and others. It was a master stroke. Now our war chest amounts to more than $250,000. While you were standing watch, Beaumont Rotary became larger and more powerful, our budget increasing sixfold, and our membership rising, peaking several years ago at more than 400. This catapulted the club into the ranks of the largest clubs in the United States and qualified us for membership in an exclusive large clubs association. In that group, you confirmed what you had already suspected, that when compared to others, ours is a very good club, extremely rich in membership and tradition and accomplishment. As Rotarian Muzan Biggs noted when transferring his membership from Houston to Beaumont, I'm moving from the world's largest club to the best. For 30 years, Margaret, you've been our heart and soul, our ambition and our conscience. A strong hand with a soft touch, you've been our co-captain and our navigator. With your help, we have dared much, ventured far, but always returned home. Often it seemed you had magical powers, that you could work miracles, orchestrating myriad personalities and talents, curbing the headstrong, bucking up the broken-hearted, encouraging the timid to find new talents. Indeed, you accomplished almost everything except teaching Ray Riley to sing "Oh Danny Boy." You are a graceful lady, a true woman, a good Rotarian. You personify the ideals of our organization. Your words have the ring of truth and common sense. We depend on your good judgment. Our old friend Jim Dunnigan had a favorite saying. "What's the deal, man?" he would say when expressing disapproval or consternation. If Jim were here tonight, he'd be worried. He'd say, "What's the deal, Margaret? You can't retire." But you would comment, touch him on the arm and say, "It's okay, Jim. Time passes. Things change. Accept the consequences. Everything is going to be just fine." Because you said it, Jim would be satisfied. And because you said it, we are satisfied. We love you, Margaret, and we wish you Godspeed.
Thanks for the memories. The world recalls the 60s, filled with war and strife. But Rotary remembers that you came into its life. Oh, thank you so much.
From the tone of that letter, you would think that everything was peaches and cream, but I've had something that's stuck in my craw for a lot of years, and I'm going to tell you about it tonight. Jill Crook was president when we hired Margaret to come take care of us, and Bill Phillips followed him as president. When Bill Phillips was president-elect, our club was invited to come to an alleged large club conference as observers. I say alleged because you'll understand that in just a moment. The next year, I was president-elect, and I went nowhere. And the next year, Charles Locke was the president-elect, and he and Margaret went off to this alleged large club conference. I submit a clandestine location. And ever since then, every one of these presidents you see seated here today have been off to this alleged large club conference with Margaret. So I'm here to tell you, and I want to get this off my chest because it's borne me much pain. I am the only man sitting up here that has not spent a weekend away with Margaret. And I'm damn well ticked off about the whole thing. And the man who succeeded me was Charles Locke.
Well, Alec would have you think it was all peaches and cream for Margaret and me, but it didn't just work out that way, Margaret, because the Vietnam War was still on, and then the Hurricane Camille came in and tried to blow all the Gulf Coast away during the time we were serving. And poor Margaret, by this time, she's really upset. And then Sun Oil Company said, well, they're going to move, and all the good members that we had left. And Margaret thought, well, I'm sure she had second thoughts whether she ought to continue to serve. But anyway, she did. And then all these young fellas followed Alec and me. And so anyway, she served us, and Margaret, we were appreciative of all that. We did end up the year with a good year, and we did concentrate on youth service. And Margaret, again, as she has been ever since, she was the one that was backing us and the real backbone of our organization. Margaret, we thank you.
Thanks for the memories. You took us through the 70s with leadership and grace. Our membership was growing as we closed our eyes to race. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think I'll just sit down. My year as president was 1971 and 1972, and some interesting things about that time. Our budget was a little over $30,000. Today it's $148,000. Doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but times change, don't they? We moved our headquarters from the Ridgewood Motel to the Red Carpet Inn on September the 1st of that year. And our buffet lunch at the Red Carpet was $2.75. And we introduced soup and sandwich for the first time as Rotarians, and that was $1.75. The August class of perfect attendance during that year was led by Harold Carpenter, a former president of the Rotary Club for 24 years. We had Governor Preston Smith as a speaker, and also Lieutenant Governor Ben Barnes. Peter Wells, who many of you will remember very fondly, was our holiday party speaker, and his subject was Zero, When Christmas Began. Frank White was elected district governor nominee for 1973 and 74, and he became the 8th district governor from our club. As a personal note, I would like to say that President Tommy at that time was 15 years old. And he was already in love with Catherine, his lovely wife, who is just as pretty now as she was then. I would like to take an opportunity to thank Jane, who has always supported me so well in everything that I've undertaken, and especially Margaret. It was a real joy. We look forward to being with you many times in years to come. Thank you. I guess so many things happened to me when I was president, and I got to go on one of those trips with Margaret that Alex is complaining about, and it was 19 whatever it was, and I've got to confess to you, I had not been on a jet plane, and we were going to Salt Lake. Margaret and I were going to Salt Lake, and we were going to ride on a jet plane. I had flown a lot when I was a boy, but that was all prop planes. And I had never been on a jet plane, and it was sort of, I was sort of concerned about it. And Margaret told me it was going to be fine, and we were going to make it. And we were driving over to Intercontinental Airport, and we got a speeding ticket at Dayton, Texas. You remember they had that speed trap there. And but after getting that ticket, it was a great trip, and I remember being very startled and pleased the way that jet plane jumped up on that runway and carried us away. And we had a great trip, and I've been on a high ever since. Thank you very much, Margaret.
Margaret and I went to Sacramento together. Allison was a good sport, so I went along with us. Just came out. I think the purpose of it was to try to train me so I wouldn't stumble around and do things like we'll probably do tonight. But the training didn't work too well. Came back, we started our year. We had a pretty good year anyhow. We had a few high points like Jerry Nathan's 40th birthday. That was one of our real high points. We were still meeting at the Red Carpet Inn. I don't think it had burned down until the next year, maybe. And Evelyn Lard, I think, was our program every other time. She gave one program, and she was so great that every time we had some program drop out, she came back and helped us out, and I still owe her for that. Somewhere along the line, Margaret decided that a good project for us that year would be to build a greenhouse at Schlesinger. And it seemed like a good idea at the time. Is Arthur Berry here tonight? He's still a hero with me. He was our chairman. We bought this kit, and we were going to build this greenhouse next to a wall at Schlesinger. It seemed easy. We thought it'd take about a day, maybe a day and a half. Well, it turned out the kit produced a greenhouse only about this high. So we spent several weekends with Danny Wheat and others' help, Warren and Margaret in her work clothes, building about 70 feet of cement wall, about 3 foot high, so we could set this easy-to-build greenhouse on top of it. Margaret, it was a great year. I couldn't have done it without you, and I still thank you for all you did for me.
Thanks for the memories. The 80s were much better. 400 members new. much.
1980-81, we brought back the Rotary softball team and won the championship trophy in the consolation bracket. We were so desperate for fans that after the games, we bought beer for anyone who came to see us. On July 15, 1980, Margaret Cherb was unanimously elected to the position of Executive Director. We organized the first Rotary band of the modern era. They even played recognizable music. Walter Fondren was the first person to ever address our club in shirt sleeves, and Jimmy Sade from Tulsa, Oklahoma introduced us to Camp Enterprise, which we hosted for the first time. Joan Embry from San Diego Zoo was one of our interesting programs, and we introduced the first Rotary Trade Fair, which had over 26 exhibits. And last but not least was the gigantic Rotary garage sale. That was to help fund our Beaumont Rotary Foundation. It was such a huge success, but based on the enormous time expended, we made something in the neighborhood of 10 cents per man hour, which was the reason it was also our last gigantic garage sale. For these and many other things that occurred during the year, sweet Margaret, thanks for the memories.
Margaret and I got to go to Tacoma, Washington, and when Margaret asked me what the theme of my year would be, I said, well, I want to have a lot of fun, and I want the members to say, I want to go to Rotary rather than I have to go to Rotary. The years of 83, 84 were very eventful. We had great speakers, Dr. Robert E. Hayes, Sr., who was the president of Wiley College, Dr. Henry Cisneros, who at that time was mayor of San Antonio, and both received standing ovations, which was a rare thing in Rotary. Congressman Phil Graham and Dr. Carlos Canseco, who was president-elect of Rotary International from Mexico, and I had the pleasure of introducing him in his native language of Spanish. Of course, he and I were the only two people in the room that knew what I said, but I think he did appreciate the effort. Our project was the exercise station at Babes Arias Park. We participated in the Civic Club Olympics. Texas A&M was mentioned a few times during the year. I think it irritated somebody, and your president took a pie in the face. Probably only one among these group that has that distinction. My good editor of the Rotarygrams, good friend Bill Cable, and I agreed before that he would roast me every which way he could every week, and I really didn't realize how effective he would be, because when Margaret mailed out all of these Rotarygrams to people in foreign cities that didn't know us, she got phone calls and said, what kind of a nut do you have as president? There's George Adams was honored for being in our club 50 years, and on our club's birthday, Herb Weinert, Ken Ruddy, Alex Broussard, and Jerry Nathan honored all of our past presidents at that time. We started and completed plans to move to the Hilton, and through the fertile mind of Robert Robertson, my lovely daughter, Rosabelle Weinberger, was created at the Swan Song. And she was so popular, she returned for 5 or 6 more performances. For some of you newer members, that happens to be Larry Beaulieu and Drag. And at the conclusion of the year, we determined that everything in Beaumont was okie dokie.
When you all sent us to the Rotary International meeting in Birmingham, England. Well, here I was going to England for the first time, and I was president-elect of one of the largest Rotary clubs in the world. I was on a high. Well, I knew Margaret was supposed to be there because I'd signed the check for registration and all, but days went by and we looked for Margaret and never did see her. And all these other presidents and myself were being bussed from the hotel to the meeting and back. No Margaret. But I did catch sight of her once. She waved out the sunroof of a Mercedes she and her friends had rented for the duration. Margaret, did you ever see us? We waved. But seriously, we did move to the Hilton my year, and I want to tell you, Charlie alluded to it, if you're going to negotiate a lease, you want Margaret on your team, I guarantee you. We started out with one room, and she said, well, this over here would make a nice office. Well, we don't know, that's not, well, well, how many officers do we have now? 2, 3, whatever. But she's a tough worker. As far as programs that year, the 2 that stand out to me was Mr. Culligan, told us how to conserve water, and the FBI man that had all the counterfeit watches. And, we tried to sell one to CWCon, but he wouldn't buy it. Margaret, we love you.
The truth is that each one of us wanted to be her favorite president. And each of us was for 1 year, except for Robert, who was for 2. We all remember the programs, and I think we all remember the scary prospect on the first program, thinking of doing this for 52 more times. And I remember Margaret chasing down Evelyn Lord in the hall of the Sheraton halfway through the meal because the speaker hadn't shown up. But one of my clearest memories of Margaret in her role as always program chairman was one time when I was making up at another club and Margaret was there making up, and she wasn't even a member. She was previewing the program, and the fellow that had the program was demonstrating a small trampoline. Actually, he was selling a small trampoline. And at the end of the program, Margaret went up and introduced herself to him. And he said, I'm going to be your program tomorrow. And she said, no, you're not. We just canceled you. Margaret, you saved us all many, many, many times, and we do appreciate it.
Margaret, you tried to keep me on key for so many years and you never did succeed. You know, we've all talked with a great deal of affection about it, but Margaret, I really do love you. And I got to spend several good trips with Margaret. We got to make our trip. When I got elected president, I came to her, I said, Margaret, they made a really bad mistake. I don't know what to do. She says, I know that. And I said, where do we go from here? She said, just pay attention. I'll take care of you. We went to Long Beach for our weekend with the big club. And she said, here's somebody you need to meet. She introduced me to Angelo Labrisi, who was president of the Chicago Rotary Club, #1. And he says, he knows about volunteers. He said, to ask him, how do you get volunteers? And I said, Angelo, how do you get volunteers? He said, I don't know. I just ask them to do it, and for some reason, they always do. She knew everybody in the big clubs, and when we made that trip, I realized that there were so many of those people. There were over 50 of them there, and all of the executive directors were members of Rotary, with the exception of Margaret. That was the 75th year. That was 1987. If you remember, that was the year that we introduced females to the Beaumont Rotary Club. And it was my pleasure and really privilege to be able to sneak it through from Wilton White, who was going to do it the year before. I was able to finesse it to where I got to do it in our year. Margaret is the first female member of Rotary, and after the club made the decision, we included her, and I had the real privilege of introducing you, if you remember it, to the Rotary Club as our first female member. And I said, Margaret, we all love you, and we can't tell you how much we appreciate you. Welcome to Rotary. And I reached over and I gave her a kiss and I said, and you're the first Rotarian I've ever kissed. And she said, well, Ray, you're not the first one I've ever kissed. Margaret, thanks for the memories. There's nobody but you're the only one.
Well, my year was 1989-1990. I closed out the decade, and Margaret and I traveled to 2 meetings, the large club meetings in San Jose. Then we went to the International Convention in Seoul, Korea. What an event. Of all the things that I can remember about my year as president, all the projects and all the new inductees as members and so forth, I do remember 2 things. One, the International Convention in Seoul, where we met as a group with 38,000 other Rotarians from around the world. And the opening speaker, the President of South Korea, said to us, "You are the third largest event in the history of South Korea, behind the Korean War and the 1988 Olympics." It was a wonderful year. But on the way back from that convention, we were traveling with the San Antonio group, if you remember correctly. Margaret put my name down as Robert B. Swerdlow Jr. I'm Robert A. Swerdlow No Jr., but that's okay. We were really very good friends. Knew each other very well. And on the way back, we stopped in Hong Kong for a couple of days in order to make our connections back to the States. And when that was going on, the Tiananmen Square event occurred in China. And one day we got up in our hotel, looked outside, and in Hong Kong, there was a march of 1 million. 1/6 of the population of Hong Kong, 1 million people, were marching down Nathan Road in protest against the Chinese massacre of the students in Tiananmen Square. So I had the camera, I ran outside to see what was going on. Before I knew it, I was in the crowd, put a headband on me, gave me a placard, and I was gone. I didn't see Margaret for the rest of the day. But that was an international event which kind of stuck in my mind. And a local event was my project for the year. The one I wanted to introduce that we still have in our club was youth recognition. And we wanted to have a new award called Youth Recognition Service Above Self. And the Service Above Self Award we kicked off on April 27th, 1990 with a small event at the Civic Center in conjunction with National Youth Service Day, in which we had 5,000 young people from Beaumont at the Civic Center to see our awardees receive the first annual Rotary Club Service Above Self Award. That event was televised nationally. It had all we could ever imagine in one event, and what pleases me most is the fact that it still continues today. What I remember most of all in my relationship with Margaret was that I found out very quickly that each of us that had served as president back to the year 1913, who have served with an executive director or executive secretary, and particularly those 31 of us who served with Margaret, thought we were the wheel, the rotary wheel, the thing that makes Rotary go round and round. What we really found out was that Margaret was the cog in that wheel. Thanks for the memories, Margaret.
Thanks for the memories. The 90s brought the decade when you wanted to retire, but you changed your plans and stayed a while, 'cause that was our desire. Oh, thank you so much.
1990, 1991 was my Rotary year, and I got a lot of good advice out of Margaret during that year. I did get her off, Alex, eat your heart out, to 2 conferences. I had to share with Martha at the International Conference in Portland, Oregon, but I got her off to Bill in Texas by myself for large pleasure. The program that I remember in particular was the first one of the year. I had set my goal to have quality programs as perhaps my top agenda. I asked Rick Kennedy to be program chairman, and Rick did his usual magnificent job like he does in everything he undertakes. I was adamant that we did not want any political programs, and Rick agreed. So right off the bat, in that first week, before the communication could go out, we got a program schedule. And Rick came back and said, "Dan, we got a problem. We got a political program." I said, "Rick, we decided we didn't want a political program. Who is it?" "It's a dark horse candidate for governor by the name of Ann Richards." And I said, "Rick, cancel it." And he said, "You think we really ought to cancel it?" And I said, "You know, we talked about this, we committed ourselves, we told several people that we weren't going to have political programs. I really would like to cancel it." So Rick, in his wisdom, sought some counsel from Margaret, and he asked if we'd canceled programs before, and she said, "Yes, we have, but probably not one of this stature, and it might be a good idea just to go ahead and let her come." Rick came back and gave me that report. I was pretty adamant about it. I said, "Rick, I really don't want to do that. Would you please set about to cancel it?" So I think somewhat reluctantly, Rick approached the monthly program chairman for that month, told that person what we wanted to do. And of course, you can imagine what kind of reception he got from that party, going back to then Treasurer Ann Richards and telling her we had a problem and she wasn't going to be able to come. So Rick went back to Margaret again and he said, "We got a real dilemma here. Dan's pretty concerned and really wants to cancel the program. What do you think?" And she said, "Well, Rick, it's going to have to be your call. You know, Dan nominated you as program chairman. The board concurred. So it's really your decision. You're just going to have to live with them and work that out. She said, but I want to ask you one question. What are you going to do if she gets elected governor? So Rick came back to me and asked the same question. What are we going to do if she's elected governor? Well, that was a long shot, right? That wasn't going to happen. But I acquiesced reluctantly, and we allowed the program to take place. And that's one of the best examples of, I'm sure, many bad decisions I made that year that with Margaret's counsel, we turned around and turned into a good decision. And the other program that I particularly remember was the time we were having the U.S. Air Force come in for some kind of presentation, and we had a trace of fall, and they canceled because they couldn't land at Jefferson County Airport. Now all the commercial flights came and went all day, no problem. But the Air Force couldn't land. Unfortunately, we had Judge Larry Kidd standing by, and we took advantage of it. So, Margaret, I'm grateful for all the support that you gave me and all those good decisions that you helped me make, and I love you, you know that. Thanks for the memory.
Had I known, upon being confronted by that imposing group of past Rotary presidents asking me to be the president of Rotary in 1992-93, that I would also be the interim president of Lamar University at the same time, my answer to them might have been a different one. But in June of 1992, with my wife Barbara and Margaret and a few other Rotarians, I headed off to Orlando, Florida for the Rotary International Convention. And my task upon my return was to watch over two magic kingdoms, that of Rotary and Lamar University. In which role I sometimes fluctuated, I'm sure, from the Prince of the Enchanted Chapel to Mickey Mouse. In the midst that year of deflecting various barbs from people like Larry Beaulieu about what was going on at Lamar, I survived and was glad to see our club deliver 6,000 pounds of books to Mindanao University in the Philippines with the help of Joy Reagan, a successful camp enterprise with the assistance of Lois Stanton, and worked along with 85 other Rotarians on the Imagination Station, the playground in Central Park, headed up by Tommy Lamb, Jr. So I survived my double presidency, too, with the help of Margaret Cherb, who was indeed the wind beneath my wings, eventually launching me into my swan song, the last bars of which were sung not by the Fat Lady, but by Lamar graduate Debbie Maffett, Miss America of 1983, who helped me close my Rotary year, 1992-93. Thank you, Margaret.
Well, Brock, it is quite an experience to have this group come to you and ask you if you would consider being the president of this Rotary Club. And there's some misgivings that go through your mind. After I had been asked and the group had departed, Bruce Irvine, who leads Brock in this office and has since died, came to me and he said, the thing that you will be astounded with is how Wednesday comes every third day. That's about right. 1993, 1994 was one of our greatest years. I was blessed with a wonderful board of directors and was provided with some awfully good chairmen. And we set about and we did some wonderful things. We got a special presentation, certification from the district governor or the international governor. We were awarded the best large club in our district, an award that we had never been able to achieve. We did some really great things. We got serious, we got behind important things in this community and began to work towards the passage of the bond issue for the Beaumont Independent School District. It wasn't me, it wasn't my board, and truthfully, it wasn't the committees either. The year before I assumed the presidency, I took some notes. Margaret would say, and looking back over the past years, I think we should have done this. I wish we had been able to do that. Why didn't we do that in a prior year? I sat down with Margaret in the year that I was planning it, and I said, well, Margaret, what would you want to do? And truthfully, I made a list of what Margaret felt like we should do. And that was my agenda for the year. That was 1993, that was 1994, that was Margaret's year. And I appreciate the success that she brought to this club.
Margaret, 1994, 95 was the year I had 2 wives. I'd been a person who married a lady that would share very well, but when it came to Margaret, you just knew if you were going to be in the position of president of Rotary, that Margaret was going to be a great part of your life. And when I asked the people that came to me, the selection committee for the president-elect as they called it at that time, would you serve? I said one thing. I said, I hear Margaret's going to retire. Margaret doesn't stay, I won't serve. And I was so blessed to have Margaret there because I never had an executive position such as president of Rotary before in a volunteer organization such as this. And when I did bring these salts to Margaret, she said, don't worry, I'll run it for you. We'll just have a great time. And boy, did we. So I had 2 themes that year. The one thing was education. No granites, no images for Rotary specifically, but something good for Beaumont. So our theme was to concentrate on education in Beaumont. David Head had done a great job in the previous year in helping the Rotary Club back to the bond election. This year, this was the year that we actually all went to school with Rotary. Many people were involved in it. We also had a great deal of fun. It seemed like every time we had an important committee meeting, and I asked Margaret where we were going to meet, she said, well, let's meet at your house. You serve great hors d'oeuvres and drinks over there. And indeed we did. We had 2 great trips, one to Corpus Christi with the large club group that we enjoyed, and another trip that I was able to make with my wife to Nice, France, which I believe between Joanne and Margaret turned out to be one of the grandest things I could have ever experienced. But my major thought that I have with Rotary that year was how smooth everything went. Nothing seemed to break down, and that's because I sort of turned over all the worries and problems to Margaret and let her run it, and boy, she did a great job of it. Margaret, thank you so much for the wonderful experience. We love you.
Well, when I was approached and asked to be president of Rotary, I was greatly honored and accepted, and after that I learned that I was going to be the United States Attorney and was going to be serving in Washington on Janet Reno's advisory committee, and I became concerned that time might be a problem of balancing all those things, and at that point my good friends, the past presidents who'd asked me to be president of Rotary, came forward and informed me that Margaret was going to retire, and I was a little shocked after I threatened to indict a few people.